I need to fill this prescription with insulin.
I cannot sell you this medicine.
Pharmacist refused to fill a veteran's prescription. 7 minutes later, the state director showed up. "Look, old man, I already told you we don't take VA prescriptions anymore," Marcus said, barely looking up from his phone as he dismissed Thomas with a wave of his hand. "Find somewhere else." Thomas felt his jaw tighten, his weathered hands gripping the counter. "Son, I've been coming here for 3 years. This insulin isn't optional. It's what keeps me alive." "Not my problem." Marcus shrugged, his voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe you should have planned better instead of waiting until the last minute like this." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Here he was, a Purple Heart recipient who'd bled for this country, being treated like garbage by someone who'd never sacrificed anything. But what Marcus didn't know was that Thomas had one phone number that would change everything in the next 7 minutes. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and hit that like button to hear how this veteran's single phone call brought the most powerful health official in the state straight to this pharmacy and completely destroyed this arrogant pharmacist's world. Listen to the full story. Now, there are moments in life when injustice seems to triumph, when power is abused and kindness is trampled upon. But sometimes, in just 7 minutes, everything can change completely. This is the story of a veteran, an arrogant pharmacist, and a phone call that shook the entire system to its core. The old Honda Civic shuddered violently as it stopped in front of Medicare Plus Pharmacy in the downtown district. The engine coughed and wheezed like an old man struggling for breath, sputtering a few times before dying completely, as if it too was as weary and battle-worn as its owner. Outside, the temperature had soared to a brutal 102 degrees, making the air shimmer like waves above hot asphalt, turning the entire street into what felt like the inside of a furnace. Thomas Mitchell, 67 years old, stepped out of the car with movements that were deliberate, yet measured each step, calculated despite the obvious stiffness in his joints. His faded navy blue polo shirt bore the telltale signs of countless washings, the fabric soft and thin from years of wear. His khaki pants were pressed with military precision, creating sharp creases that could cut glass, and his black leather shoes maintained a mirror-like shine that spoke to decades of ingrained discipline. But what stood out most prominently was his baseball cap, a weathered piece of fabric adorned with Vietnam Veteran, embroidered in fading gold thread, an item he never left home without. Thomas's weathered face told 1,000 stories through its deep etched lines and creases. These weren't just the marks of age, but the permanent etchings of hardship, loss, and perseverance carved by time and circumstance. His pale blue eyes, though clouded slightly by cataracts, remained remarkably sharp and alert. But there was something else lurking in their depths, a bone-deep weariness that came from fighting too many battles. He had served 2 grueling tours in Vietnam from 1969 to 1971, returning home with a Purple Heart medal that sat in a dusty box in his bedroom drawer, along with invisible wounds that ran deeper than any piece of shrapnel could ever penetrate. For 40 long years, Thomas had lived with post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic joint pain that flared up with every change in weather, and most recently, the daily challenge of managing type 2 diabetes. Today's problem was deceptively simple, but urgently critical. Thomas desperately needed insulin. His last vial had run completely dry that morning during his routine injection, and the doctor at the VA hospital had written a new prescription just hours earlier. This wasn't his first visit to this particular pharmacy. Thomas had been a loyal, regular customer for 3 years, running always polite and respectful, always paying his bills on time, without question. The door chime rang with a soft, melodic tone as Thomas pushed through the heavy glass door and entered the pharmacy. The sudden blast of cool air from the industrial-strength air conditioning system created a sharp, almost shocking contrast to the oppressive heat outside. The pharmacy itself wasn't particularly large, but it was meticulously organized and professionally maintained with towering medicine shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. Behind the imposing checkout counter, made of polished marble, sat a man in his early 30s who was completely absorbed in scrolling through his smartphone. This was Marcus Webb, the head pharmacist and sole owner of the establishment. He wore a pristine white coat that looked like it had just come from the dry cleaner, his dark hair slicked back with expensive gel that caught the light from the overhead fluorescent fixtures. Most notably, he sported a gleaming Rolex Submariner on his wrist, a watch that cost more than most people made in 6 months. Marcus wasn't necessarily a bad pharmacist from a purely technical standpoint. His knowledge of medications and drug interactions was adequate, and he rarely made serious errors in filling prescriptions. However, he suffered from a much more serious character flaw, an insufferable arrogance coupled with a complete lack of empathy for his customers. Born into a wealthy family that had handed him everything on a silver platter, Marcus had never faced real adversity, never struggled to pay bills, never worried about where his next meal would come from. "Good afternoon," Thomas said in his characteristically calm, measured tone, carefully placing the crisp prescription paper on the marble counter. "I need to fill this insulin prescription, please." Marcus slowly looked up from his phone, his eyes scanning Thomas from head to toe with an expression that could only be described as barely concealed contempt. He immediately recognized this customer, the old man who always showed up with prescriptions from the VA hospital, who always asked about senior discounts, who always wore those same tired, outdated clothes. "Let me take a look," Marcus said, his voice dripping with cold indifference as he reluctantly reached for the prescription. He glanced at it with the most superficial attention possible, barely reading the details before carelessly tossing it back onto the counter like it was contaminated. "I can't fill this for you." Thomas felt his eyebrows furrow in genuine confusion. "Excuse me, sir, but is there some kind of problem with the prescription? Is something wrong with the dosage or the doctor's signature? This prescription is from the VA hospital." Marcus replied, his voice now carrying an unmistakable tone of disdain and disgust. "We don't accept prescriptions from there anymore. Too much hassle with their insurance system, too much bureaucratic paperwork, too many headaches for too little profit." This statement was not just misleading, it was a complete and utter fabrication. Medicare Plus had always accepted prescriptions from the VA hospital without any issues whatsoever, and Marcus knew this fact perfectly well. The truth was that he was having an absolutely terrible day. He'd had a screaming argument with his girlfriend that morning. Over his gambling habits, several customers had complained bitterly about his pharmacy's inflated prices, and his accountant had just informed him that his profit margins were down for the quarter. Thomas felt his blood pressure beginning to rise, the familiar sensation of heat creeping up his neck and into his cheeks. But he made a conscious effort to maintain his composure and speak reasonably. "Marcus, I've been purchasing my medications here for 3 full years now. There has never been a single problem or complication. This is insulin. I literally need it to survive. Without it, I could go into diabetic shock." "I already told you what the situation is," Marcus replied, his voice becoming even harder and more dismissive. "We simply don't service VA prescriptions anymore. Period. End of discussion. You'll have to find somewhere else to get your drugs." "Somewhere else?" Thomas asked, his voice beginning to carry the first hints of desperation and disbelief. "The nearest pharmacy that accepts VA prescriptions is over 20 miles away. My car is barely running. It might not even make it that far. And I need this medication today, not tomorrow or next week." Marcus responded with an exaggerated theatrical shrug that conveyed complete indifference to Thomas's plight. "That's really not my problem or my concern. Maybe you should have planned better, been more organized, thought ahead, instead of waiting until the last minute like this." This callous statement hit Thomas like a physical blow to the chest. He had planned. He always planned everything meticulously, a habit ingrained from decades of military training. But sometimes, life throws curveballs that no amount of planning can anticipate. Sometimes, medicine bottles accidentally break when they fall. Sometimes, doctors get called away for emergencies and can't write prescriptions as early as usual. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Thomas asked, his voice still controlled, but now carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of steel. "Do you know anything about my background or what I've been through?" "You're just another old man with a government prescription," Marcus replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. "And like I've already explained multiple times, we don't deal with that bureaucratic nonsense anymore." Thomas felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart with an iron fist. This wasn't just about being refused service. He'd experienced that before and survived it. This was about the complete lack of respect, the utter dismissal of his humanity, the way Marcus was looking at him as if he were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of trash. "I served this country with honor and distinction," Thomas said, his voice beginning to carry the authority and strength that had once commanded respect on battlefields halfway around the world. "I fought in the jungles of Vietnam so that people like you could live in freedom and prosperity, so you could build businesses and pursue your dreams without fear." Marcus actually had the audacity to laugh, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed through the pharmacy like a slap. "Oh, wonderful, here we go with another one of those tired old war stories. I'm absolutely sick of hearing them, old man. That whole era is ancient history now. This is the modern business world, and I have every legal right to refuse service to anyone I choose." Thomas stood perfectly still for several long seconds, feeling as though the entire world around him was tilting on its axis and spinning out of control. This confrontation had transcended being about insulin or prescriptions or even customer service. This had become about fundamental human dignity, about respect for sacrifice, about how a civilized society should treat the men and women who had given their youth and health to protect it. With hands that trembled slightly, whether from anger, low blood sugar, or both, he carefully extracted his phone from his pocket. It was an older iPhone with a cracked protective case held together with electrical tape, a device that had seen better days but still functioned when he needed it most. His weathered fingers moved across the screen as he scrolled through his contacts to find a number he had saved years ago, but never imagined he would actually need to use. "Hello, this is Thomas Mitchell," he said into the phone, his voice suddenly calm and professional in a way that made Marcus look up from his own device with the first stirrings of unease. "I need to speak with Director Sarah Chen immediately. Tell her it's Tom Mitchell from the 25th Infantry Division." Marcus watched this exchange with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed contempt. Who was this pathetic old man calling some bureaucrat at the Department of Health who would file his complaint in a drawer and forget about it? The idea that this shabby veteran could have any real connections or influence was laughable. "Sarah, this is Tom." Thomas continued, his voice taking on the crisp, efficient tone of someone reporting a serious military situation. "I'm currently at Medicare Plus Pharmacy on Main Street downtown. There's a situation developing here that I believe requires your immediate personal attention and intervention." Something in Thomas's tone and bearing had shifted dramatically, and Marcus was beginning to feel the first cold fingers of genuine worry creeping up his spine. The old man's entire demeanor had changed. He was no longer a desperate customer begging for help, but rather a confident individual reporting a significant problem to someone in authority. "Yes, that's correct. The pharmacist here has explicitly refused to fill my insulin prescription, claiming that this establishment no longer accepts any prescriptions from the VA hospital system." Thomas continued with military precision. "I'm well aware that such a policy would constitute a direct violation of federal law." "Yes, I understand completely. I'll remain here and wait for your arrival." Thomas ended the call and looked directly into Marcus's eyes with a gaze that could have melted steel. "The state health director will be arriving here within the next few minutes to personally investigate this situation." Marcus felt all the color drain from his face, as if someone had opened a valve and let his blood run out onto the floor. "The state health director? You're bluffing. There's no way you know anyone that important." "Dr. Sarah Chen," Thomas said with quiet confidence, each word falling like a hammer blow. "We served together in Vietnam from 1970 to 1971. She was a battlefield nurse with the 25th Infantry Division, and I was a combat medic. During our tour, we saved each other's lives on multiple occasions." Marcus felt as though someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over his head, followed immediately by a crushing weight settling on his chest. He knew exactly who Dr. Sarah Chen was. She was one of the most powerful and influential government officials in the entire state, renowned throughout the medical community for her unwavering integrity, her encyclopedic knowledge of healthcare law, and her absolutely zero tolerance for any violations of patient rights or professional standards. You can't do this to me." Marcus stammered, his previous arrogance evaporating like morning mist. "This is just a simple misunderstanding between customer and business owner. There's no need to involve state officials in such a minor dispute." "A misunderstanding?" Thomas asked, his voice now carrying the cold precision of a surgical instrument. "You deliberately refused to sell life-saving medication to a disabled veteran based on a completely fabricated policy in direct violation of the Veterans Healthcare Access Act. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a federal crime." Marcus began to panic as the full implications of his actions started to crash down on him like an avalanche. He was acutely aware that pharmacies had strict legal obligations to accept prescriptions from VA hospitals, especially for essential medications like insulin that patients needed to survive. This type of violation could result in massive fines, license suspension, or even complete revocation of his right to practice pharmacy anywhere in the country. At that precise moment, the distinctive sound of a powerful car engine could be heard pulling into the parking lot outside. Through the large plate glass windows, Marcus watched in growing horror as a sleek black Mercedes sedan came to a stop directly in front of the pharmacy. The driver's door opened, and an elegant Asian woman in her mid-60s stepped out with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to wielding significant authority. Dr. Sarah Chen was dressed in an impeccably tailored navy blue business suit that spoke of both professionalism and power. Her silver-gray hair was styled in a sophisticated bob that framed her intelligent face, and she carried an expensive leather briefcase that undoubtedly contained the legal authority to shut down Marcus's entire operation with a few signatures. She entered the pharmacy with the confident stride of someone who had walked into countless similar situations and always emerged victorious. Her sharp eyes quickly surveyed the scene, taking in every detail before focusing on Thomas with a warm smile that transformed her entire face. "Tom," she said, her voice carrying both genuine affection and professional authority. "It's been far too long since we've seen each other." "Sarah," Thomas replied, his face breaking into the first genuine smile he'd worn all day. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I know how busy your schedule must be." Dr. Chen then turned her attention to Marcus, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as her expression shifted to one of cold, professional scrutiny. "I am Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of the State Department of Health. I understand there has been a serious incident here involving the refusal of essential medical services to a veteran. Marcus felt as though he were standing in a courtroom dock facing a judge who had already heard overwhelming evidence of his guilt. "Dr. Chen, I want to assure you that this is nothing more than a simple misunderstanding that has been blown completely out of proportion." "A misunderstanding?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice carrying the sharp edge of a prosecutor who had just caught a defendant in a lie. "Are you telling me that you did not explicitly refuse to fill a valid insulin prescription for Mr. Mitchell here?" She opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency and withdrew a thick legal notebook. "Let me explain to you exactly how serious this situation has become. You have violated no fewer than 3 separate federal statutes and 2 state regulations." Marcus felt his knees beginning to shake as the full weight of his legal jeopardy became clear. "First, and most importantly," Dr. Chen continued, "the Veterans Healthcare Access Act explicitly requires all licensed pharmacies to accept and fill valid prescriptions from VA medical facilities without discrimination or delay. Violation of this federal law carries penalties of up to $50,000 per incident and potential criminal charges." She paused to let this information sink in before continuing. "Second, the Healthcare Anti-Discrimination Act prohibits any medical service provider from refusing treatment based on the source of a patient's insurance or the nature of their government benefits. Third, our state's Professional Pharmacy Responsibility Statute mandates that licensed pharmacists must prioritize patient health and safety above all other considerations." Thomas recounted the entire incident with the precision and objectivity of a military after-action report, describing exactly what had been said and done from Marcus's initial refusal to fill the prescription all the way through the dismissive comments about military service being ancient history. When Thomas reached the part where Marcus had laughed and said he was sick of hearing those tired old war stories, Dr. Chen's expression became absolutely glacial. "Mr. Webb," Dr. Chen said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of a direct order, "you will fill Mr. Mitchell's prescription right now, this very moment. Furthermore, you will apply every available discount and reduction to minimize his out-of-pocket cost." Marcus practically ran to the pharmacy storage area, his hand shaking so badly that he nearly dropped the insulin vial twice while preparing the prescription. "Here's your insulin, sir," Marcus said as he placed the medication bag on the counter. "The total cost is $12 after applying our maximum veteran discount." Thomas paid for his medication, but Dr. Chen was far from finished. "Now, we need to address the broader implications," she announced. "Mr. Webb, I am hereby initiating a formal state investigation into the operations and practices of this pharmacy. Within 48 hours, you will receive official notification of a comprehensive compliance inspection." She continued relentlessly. "In addition to the formal investigation, you will be required to complete a comprehensive retraining program covering professional ethics, healthcare law, and patient rights. Furthermore, you will compose and submit a formal written apology to Mr. Mitchell, acknowledging your violations and providing a detailed plan for ensuring that such incidents never occur again." In the weeks that followed, Marcus underwent the most thorough pharmacy inspection in the state's history. The investigation uncovered a pattern of overcharging elderly customers, maintaining inadequate medication storage temperatures, and demonstrating consistently poor customer service toward anyone who wasn't wealthy or well-connected. The consequences were severe. His pharmacy license was suspended for 6 months. He was fined $75,000 by the state licensing board, and he was required to complete 300 hours of community service specifically at veterans' medical facilities. The negative publicity caused many customers to take their business elsewhere, ultimately forcing Marcus to sell Medicare Plus to a regional pharmacy chain that specialized in serving veterans and elderly patients. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this story was the genuine transformation that occurred in Marcus himself. During his mandatory community service at the VA Medical Center, Marcus encountered hundreds of veterans from conflicts spanning from World War II to recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He heard their stories, learned about their sacrifices, and began to understand the profound disconnect between his privileged background and the experiences of people who had risked everything for their country. Through these interactions, Marcus began to see his profession not as a business opportunity, but as a calling to serve others in their most vulnerable moments. He completed his required training with enthusiasm rather than resentment, and even continued his education beyond what was mandated, earning additional certifications in geriatric pharmacy and veteran health care. 6 months after the original incident, Thomas was sitting in the waiting room of the VA Medical Center for his regular quarterly checkup when he heard someone call his name in a hesitant, uncertain voice. "Mr. Mitchell." Thomas looked up and was genuinely surprised to see Marcus Webb standing nearby. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the arrogant, expensively dressed young man who had dismissed him so callously. In his place stood someone who appeared humble, thoughtful, and genuinely remorseful. Mr. Mitchell, I know I have absolutely no right to ask this of you, but could I please have just a few minutes of your time? Marcus asked, his voice carrying none of the condescension that had characterized their previous interaction. There's something I need to say to you. Thomas studied Marcus's face for a long moment, seeing something that hadn't been there before: genuine remorse, humility, and what appeared to be hard-won wisdom. All right, Marcus, I'm listening. First and most importantly, I want to thank you, Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. I know that probably sounds strange, but what happened 6 months ago fundamentally changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Marcus continued, I've spent the past 6 months working here as a volunteer. I've met hundreds of veterans, heard their stories, learned about the sacrifices they made and the challenges they continue to face. For the first time in my life, I truly understand what service means, what sacrifice looks like. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple business card. I've decided to specialize in geriatric and veteran pharmacy services. I'm going back to school to get additional training, and I want to dedicate my professional life to serving people like you, people who have given so much and deserve the very best care we can provide. Thomas took the card and examined it carefully. It listed Marcus's name and credentials along with his specialization in veteran healthcare services. Marcus, Thomas said finally, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had seen both the worst and best of human nature. Everyone deserves a second chance to do better, to be better. The fact that you've learned from this experience and are committed to positive change speaks well of your character. Marcus's eyes filled with tears as he heard these words of forgiveness and encouragement. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to become the person I should have been all along. As Marcus walked away, Thomas sat back and reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them both to this moment. Sometimes the most difficult and painful experiences in life become the catalysts for the most profound positive changes. Sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't just protect us, it also provides others with the opportunity to grow and become better versions of themselves. 7 minutes can indeed change everything. 7 minutes between a phone call and the arrival of justice. 7 minutes between injustice and accountability. 7 minutes between despair and hope. And sometimes those 7 minutes can change not just one life or even 2 lives, but can ripple outward to transform an entire community, an entire profession, and an entire system of care. The power of standing up for what's right, even when it seems hopeless, can create changes that extend far beyond what we can imagine in that moment of decision.